everybody, good afternoon. This is Nirali Shah, and I'm live with episode 6 of Newgen Perspective on Ramayan. And I hope you've been watching my previous episodes. It's a different way of storytelling, it's not a usual version of how the stories are told. And many of you may find it not a typical storytelling, but at all. And the way to really listen to this story is not to focus on the words, but to stay connected to the energy and actually dwell or allow yourself to dwell with that energy into that world in which I'm tapping into every moment while I tell the story. So what happens is that, and I'm going to share a little bit of here and there while some of you actually happen to come aboard on this live. So what happens is that when I am actually tapping it, talking about a certain aspect of Ram and his life and the characters around him, I'm actually going into that specific timeline and I'm looking for the information that has been missing, that perspective that he lived, which got lost. And at all, you've seen the intro of Ramayana and why I thought of even doing the story on the first place with this different perspective. You would know that I actually spoke about how the journey of entire human uh, uh, civilizations evolved, and we had certain downfalls, and then we came to a place where we lost a lot of information. People who talked about a certain higher perspective were tortured into all of that. So I would totally request you to go into the intro session either on my Facebook page or on my YouTube channel, Alchemy of Being. And that's where the versions of Ramayana started to change and mold into what was specifically required in that timeline. And they did it, the visionaries of that time did it with a purpose that somewhere in the future, when the time is right, people will reopen the deeper aspect or the expansive aspect of what um, what Ram is and Ram was. So it's good time to come up on the screen. Hey, so let's begin the journey of what happens to Ram now when he has already settled as a crown prince, and he started taking, he is becoming a benevolent leader that he was meant to be. He was, he came, the meaning of his name was also Ram, the one who shines as light. And the one who shines the light always turns out to be the torchbearer, the leader who walks a path of light. And also these are the people who also show rest of the world a better way of uh, living, better way of doing things, better way of running on and the world. So that's where he started his journey as a crown prince, taking charge of his role as a crown prince, getting trained to be the king. And as the days proceeded, uh, and this is a time, I've already spoken in the previous episode that this is a time where the lifespan is really big, and the sizes of the bodies are really tall. So it's not even 6 feet, it's bigger than that, it's taller than that. And it's not just, maybe 100 years or 200 years, lifespan is more than that. So uh, the time of youth is also expanded, where you have a lot of opportunity to learn and do things. So well, I believe nearly 10, 12 years he spends getting trained as a crown prince. And then finally a day arrives where Dashrath realizes that it's time for him to um, look at himself from the spiritual perspective. He needs to now spend more time introspecting his life and adding more to his life as a being. And I've also spoken earlier in the previous episodes that this is a time where the entire family of Dashrath and Jalak. Now, even if we find it hard to believe, this is a timeline where there are more awakened beings than we would have in our present timeline. Awakened beings means they are more conscious people. They are more uh, you know as I continue to say many times, they're more in communion with their being, with the source of light. They listen to, higher ways of living. They know how to connect to different dimensions. And, when I say conscious beings, meaning, the operation of a daily life is not from ego, not from the limitation, not from negativity, not from selfishness, not from meanness. Majority, I'm not saying like everybody, but majority of the crowd, they lived with this, uh, their eyes were open. Their eyes could see way more and far bigger than, we could even, fathom with our eye, with our mind at this point. So, they knew when to lead, they knew when to give in, when to give up their roles and step into a different role. So it's not like when you give up a status, uh, your journey is over. They know that they're aiming for something bigger and higher. So Dashrath realized this, and he actually discussed it with his ministry. And finally they decide Ram's coronation day. And obviously before that they had to speak it out with Ram. And Ram very gently accepts his role, and not from wow, now I'm going to be king, but yes, it's time for me to step into the role that I was born for. And I'm going to make sure that I live the best of it. And while the news of Ram's coronation and he becoming king is spreading across the kingdoms that Dashrath ruled, um, people are so beautifully welcoming and celebrating the fact that Ram is going to lead them. And somewhere they had this great trust and honor and um, uh, connection with Ram, that they were so happy to be led by him. They knew that he is the light we got to follow to have a better life. And everyone in the palace is happy. The people are celebrating in their own way. And as I said, like this in the previous episodes, that this is a time where kings and the leaders and people, they had a family like relation. Even though they're not meeting on a daily basis, they feel so connected to each other. That is the time. And uh, so this was like their own kid being crowned to be the king. That is the feeling they have for Ram. And on the other side, palace is happy, all the three queens are happy. Kaikai, Sumitra, and obviously Ram's own mother. And um, while the celebration is going on, there is this one person who's very close to the Queen Kaikai. And now we remember this is a time where queens had their says in their in the ruling of the kingdom too. They had different roles and responsibilities, and also they went on wars. And we remember um, that Kaikai played a, a very significant role in saving Dasharath in one of the wars with demons. So, she had these two boons. So, well, um, while all of this is going on, this one person, who plays the role of changing the winds for everything. And it's so funny, well, anyways, I'm going to go into the story and we'll see how the winds change. And this happens with everyone. So Kaikei is celebrating and happy. On the other side, while this decision is taken, Bharat and Shatrughna are not present in Ayodhya. They were sent to their uncle's house for a few days to meet with their grandfather, so they are not here. So, somebody uh, is sent to visit, Bharat and Shatrughna to give them the news, and then they should come back for Ram's coronation. And well, this is a time where it's not a planes travel, so they go on the horse and they take days to reach a different kingdom, passing through all the forests and all that. So obviously it's going to take time. Meanwhile, there is a preparation going on, and Lakshman and Ram and Sita and all of them are there. um, Now, there is this one lady who's very close to Kaikai, who had a different perspective, a very limited perspective. And see, this is how, how a competitive world, a limited world, and a limited way of life functions. They do not have a larger angle to life, a larger view to life. They're very limited to what is my gain in all of this. And that's what this person was. Amongst all these awakened beings, there's this one person, but this person is very close to Kaikai. She walked with Kaikai from her mother's place. So Kaikai like literally trusts this lady, and her name is Mantra, and she is more like the villain of the story, who plays from behind Kaikai. And this exactly what I was talking about, that this happens with all of us, that we have a certain perspective to life. And uh, we also find that there is some close one around us who come from a very limitation of how the life is. And sometimes, because we trust and we care for this person, we sometimes you know end up falling prey to their limitation. And this is something that we all experience. It could be anybody around us, but yes, this is what happened with Kaikai. So Mantra went to Kaikai, hearing this news, and said, why are you celebrating Ram's coronation? You should actually be mourning. And Kaika is like, he's my son. There is no separation between Ram and Bharat. They are both my sons, and that is how they had raised. All the three queens loved each of them. Like there was no my son and your son. But this lady, added this poison in Kaikai's world, in her thoughts, and said, well, you were thinking like that, but you really think after being a king, Ram is going to think like that? He's the most loved prince. People welcome him, ministers listen to him. Don't you think that his place will be taken away when he like Bharat's place will be taken away when Ram becomes king, and he will have no place. And if Bharat is no more, uh, the important one, then do you think Dashrath or anybody in the kingdom will at all, give you any importance, or Bharat any importance? You will be the sidekicks. You will be thrown out. Who knows what will happen to your son? You should be thinking about your son's future. And this is the time where the queens, the mothers knew that their sons have to create their own future. But this little uh, poison kind of literally contracted the world of Kaikai. And, from a very expansive knowledge and wisdom that she had, she started looking at things from a very smaller whole. And she actually believed, because Mantra had been her loyal servant for a very very long time. She thought, yeah, this makes sense. What if that happens? And with that came in a lot of fear, a lot of insecurity about her place and Bharat's place in um, Ayodhya, in Dashrath's life, in the palace life. And she got totally confused. And this is where confusions take place, when there is something, you have a clear mind, and then something poisonous gets added. Now let's see, how it's not somebody else who can actually add a poison. If you're strong enough, you can always avoid being poisoned. If you're very clear, what this person means, what the person's intention is, and which is something sometimes hard to get to. But well, that's the learning that we could really go towards. But in this place, Kai totally gave in, because she totally trusted Mantra. So sometimes, when you trust the wrong person, however loyal and however close they are, but sometimes, if you misidentify their intention, sometimes they could totally, take you in a very different direction. So this is something that, in interacting with people and interaction with society. And we learn with lessons that, what are the kind of people that we would like to mingle with, what the kind of people that we could have around us. um, so that's something. But always knowing that there are people who could be very close to us, and who may have an intention, may not be able to actually see the good in the bigger picture, but they would like to create an issue out of that small thing, wherein Mantra and Kaikai both knew that Ram actually loved all his brothers, and they actually had seen how beautifully they knew each other's roles, and when to give leadership to whom. So there was no way that this would have occurred for Bharat, and he would have not. And then even after that, Bharat he himself was a very powerful prince, so there was no way that he would have been taken out. But instead of trusting in all of that, instead of trusting in her own self and her son, Kaikai got into this little small mindset rather, and she got confused. So now when you're confused is where you're going to ask for advice. And sometimes we end up asking advice from a person who literally has an intention of destroying us. And so she asked Mantra, she being the loyal and old servant, she said, okay, then what do I do? How do I change this? And Mantra gave her an idea. You remember the boon you received from Dasharath? Why don't you use it? It's time to encash it. And so, um, they kind of created an entire plan. And uh, she went to a special room created for queens, where they could sulk, and they could show their remorse and their anger towards king, or about a certain decision. So, well, those were the facilities that were given to queens. And so she went to that sulking room, and she created a beautiful drama of um, how much she uh, rejects the decision of Dashrath. And so she cries, you know, and she dresses in a way where she looks like she's mourning. And Dashrath was sent this information that, um, Queen Kaikai has gone to the sulking room. And Dashrath came running, knowing this is a time of celebration. Why are you mourning? And he had no idea that something like this could occur from nowhere. This wasn't expected. This is not a time where something like this could, even come to somebody's mind. And somebody like Dashrath were like, really conscious people. And with that, I would also like to add that, the purest of the water, and we know this simile, the purest of the water, but one drop of dirt can spoil, um, the purity of the water, and it can literally, um, uh, change the purity and the clearance, the clarity of that water. So this is what happens not only in Kaikai's world, in Dashrath's world also. So, well, he asked her the reason for acting like this, and she well cried and said, you being so unfair to Bharat. He's your eldest son too, and you're giving all the importance to Ram, and this doesn't work for me. I would like to ask for an equal right for Bharat. So, and he is capable king too. So, even though you've crowned Ram the king, now this is time for me to ask for these two boons, um, that is pending for a long time. I would like to encash them. And so, obviously, this is a time when only if you're going to give something to someone is where you've spoken these words. And see, this is how the timeline and how the twists of life takes place, that something spoken so many years back, um, comes in the way of creating a different path for the entire generation. And this was a turning point in everyone's life, a very happy and prosperous time that Dashrath and the kingdom and people had. This becomes a turning point, and she says, give the throne to Bharat and send Ram to the exile for 14 years, and then after that we will see. Now, this is not coming from a very, um, from a very, um, from a calculative place. This is just something that, she says out of blue. Now, out of blue also, there's this one thing that I continuously, learn and tell myself, that there is nothing in life that is a coincidence. If it's happening, it's occurring in your life, there has to be something that that has been called, either you or something, some means has called for it. And so this was a called for situation. And so uh, Bharat, Dashrath was shocked. He obviously, uh, he had a totally different plan, and he was looking at Ayodhya and his people and his life, uh, after giving Ram the responsibility in a totally different way, where he had planned that this is how he would now focus on his life and his being, and he would perhaps retire to the forest life, and uh, you know uh, meditate and learn the higher esoteric knowledge that he couldn't focus on while he was being the king. And now this entire turn of event and the change of winds is asking him to look at his life and all his people's life and his son's life in a totally different perspective. And it was quite shocking. And this happens with all of us too, that some small incident can totally change and turn around how we have planned our life. Like it happened with all of us with the in the last 2 years with the occurrence of COVID virus. A little thing, it came from nowhere, but it turned everyone's life around. So small thing. And uh, he tries really hard to convince Kaikai to change her ask, but she wouldn't budge. And so finally, with a heavy heart, he calls in the ram, and he had no, because he just few days ago he had asked Ram to become the king, and now how can he tell his son that you're being exiled for no reason? You've done nothing wrong, just because I gave my queen these two boons, you're being exiled to the forest. So instead of Dasharath, Kaikai responds to Ram, and she speaks to him with this two condition that you know you should let Bharat be the king, and you should be exile. Dasharath is asking you to be in exile for 14 years. And the the most shocking of all of this incident was how with ease Ram accepted this invitation of being exiled into the forest. The way, how easily it accepted to be king, he was ready to go into the forest with that much ease. He's like, okay, fine, I'll go. And that shook Kaikai and Dashrath even more. Now, this is not like, we we say that Ram, he's the god, so well, it's this is how he does it, and he was very patient, and he was non-attached to things. It was material life and all of that. But it's not just that. There are so many factors to he being so okay with this. One, he knew that when the situations change, earlier this path was asking him to be king and do his work. But when situations changed, he knew that something else, with all of this, because whatever Dashrath is seeing and Kaikai is seeing and Mantra is seeing and the people are seeing, he had a sight higher than them. And so when this came in, he knew that something else is calling him in the exile period, that he gets to learn and attend to actually come back and do his role in a much better way. So this is not yet time for me to, you know, uh, be crowned the king. There's more for me to learn. And he was this one person uh, who never, stopped learning. Wherever he went, to whatever interactions he had, whether it was with his people, with his ministers, with rishis, um, with different interactions with different kingdoms, he always was the one who liked to know what is required in this space, what is it that I got to give. But for that he had to learn, he had to grasp, he had to receive, like with an empty vessel, without any prejudice, without any decisions and conclusions of I know and I'm right. you know this is how the functions of ego is. And the conscious beings function from a place of, okay, what what is it that I got to be? And even though he was this one person who could stand strong on certain decisions while he was being the crown prince to um, you know change a certain functions of the organizations in the kingdom. And even if people didn't like it, or even people were opposing to the change, which I discussed in the previous episode, this was the decision that he immediately accepted, because he knew that this is what is being called for right now. This is where he requires to give his attention, and not in this or not in Ayodhya. And he also knew that my role is not limited to Ayodhya, it's for the entire earth, and also not for now, it's also for the future generations in many many coming centuries. So well, um, he couldn't decide to um, or he couldn't take stand for something small. He could have definitely said that I wouldn't do it, but it wasn't. Uh, he knew so much more than that, and so he says fine. And he returns to his palace and he speaks it out with Sita, and Lakshman realized, came to know about this decision. Um, and on the day of coronation, when he was to actually be crowned the king, he decided to leave the palace and go into the exile. So he starts preparing for all of that. Is where Sita. Now, obviously, he didn't ask Sita to join him, but Sita knew that there is something for her. Like, this journey is together. So, and this is the purpose. One of the reasons why, we talked about the kindred spirits. The journey collides because both of them somewhere has the same purpose. And the same purpose is something that I'm going to talk about in the coming episode, which is going to be episode 7, that why Sita actually joined Ram. What was the purpose together? And listening to all of this, and finally being very sure that Ram is going to the exile, uh, he decided to go with him too. And not just because, again, not just because he's a younger brother and I want to serve you because you're an elder brother. I'm sure that was the love they shared, that he, but like they had a very 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 intense soul connection, Ram and Lakshman. So it was actually, would have been very difficult for Lakshman to stay away from Ram. That's the kind of a spirit connection they had, just like Sita and Ram had. But also, three of them had a similar goal. And so the other two, though even it was Ram who was asked to go into the exile, not Sita and Lakshman, they, with every other possible reason, giving every other possible reason, they said, we are going with Ram too. We can't stay away from him. He's going to need us. And so this is how the story still says that Sita says, I have to be where my husband is, and Lakshman says, I have to be where my brother is. But ultimately they knew that we have the same purpose in this lifetime, and so the journey is together. And so on the coronation morning, they decide to, they go in, they are clad into the most simple dressing. um, the entire Ayodhya and all the kingdoms in the nearby capital of like nearby cities came to know that Ram is no more being crowned the king, but he will be leaving into exile, and Bharat will take his place. Bharat is not yet back. Bharat and Shatrugna are still returning back on the coronation day, and they had the, um, uh, you know, they were planning that they should be right on the time of the coronation, and they have no idea what's going on. And so Ram leaves with everyone's permission, and people loved him so much that they couldn't take the word of he going away from them for 14 years, because the way he had been with them while he was the crown prince. uh, People knew that his presence meant so much, and his presence will be missed. He'll be away from them. Nobody else will be able to function and lead them in a way that he can. So they try in the best manner to convince him to stay, including all the queens. Even after they knew that Ram will not change his decision, they blessed him but tried the best to bring him back, like Sumitra and Kaushalya. Dasharath tried best to stop him, um, but Ram wouldn't. And not because he was just trying to keep his father's promise. I mean, that is one of the reasons he gave that, if you've given the word, I have to go. But it's not just that word. It's because the word has come out. There is a reason for it. And so there is something else out there that I got to attend to first. So, and this is a time where what you speak happens. This is that time. This is the magical time. Like how in the Harry Potter world, if you speak um Wingardium Leviosa, the words itself has a certain power to you know fly things and objects into the air. This is that time and space where, if something comes out of your mouth, then that means that is something uh, that has to be into action, that has to come into action. And well, they travel uh, with um, with the charioteer Sumantra or somebody. I'm not sure, but well, he was one of the loyal charioteers. And Ram, Lakshman, and Sita, they leave. It's kind of an epic scene from Ramayan Sagar's um, Ramayana also, where this is a time when that scene played on the screen, and I was literally a kid, but I remember like people in sitting in their house in us looking at that in the TV. They cried in their houses too, as if Ram was actually leaving all of them. So, well, that is the power this character has on us. um, and well, they travel all the way to uh, a river, and with him travels all the people who still had this hope that he might just come back. If we went with him, he might just come back. Or if he doesn't come back, then we will go with him all the way, and we will work for him, and we will do whatever he requires. We just can't stand being away from Ram. So that was the kind of an aura and the kind of a um, charisma Ram held over his people that bonded them together. Now, what happens? How Ram, Lakshman, Sita were actually journeying together, and the concept of kindred spirits that's now beginning to unleash is something that we will look into in the episode 7. So with all of that, I would request you to watch the previous episodes of Ramayan, a New Gen Perspective, on my YouTube channel for a better idea and different perspective of this New Gen Ramayan. And see you in the few days with episode 7. Till then, bye bye.